Nick found the ring in a storm drain, partially buried under rotting leaves, discarded cigarette butts, and crumpled paper bags. He was waiting for the train home after a day spent achieving little, when the ring caught his eye as he absent-mindedly surveyed the gutters. Without thinking, he pulled it from the mess and slipped it into his pocket. The light winter rain washed the grime from his fingers effortlessly. Nick was too absorbed in his thoughts to recall the discovery even 15 minutes later. So it came as a mild surprise when, settled comfortably on the train, he reached into his pocket and slid his finger through the ring. He quickly withdrew his hand, examining the silver band that now sat uncomfortably below his fingernail. The ring was tarnished, with deep crevices disrupting its otherwise smooth form. It resembled an old coin, dull and likely of little worth. Still lost in his worries, Nick absent-mindedly adjusted it so that it rested at the base of his finger. He twisted it absent-mindedly as his mind focused on the paper he still hadn't started researching. He tapped it lightly with his thumb, contemplating where he might find $800 for his bar application. His thoughts wandered further as he imagined whether his ex-girlfriend had moved on, and by the time his hand was cupped over the other, he decided she probably had. He folded his fingers and cracked his knuckles, reflecting on the overwhelming job market and the foolishness of taking on massive student debt for a degree in a field that offered little opportunity. As these thoughts consumed him, he didn't notice the dim train lighting brighten, nor did he register that the oppressive winter evening seemed less dreary. He briefly considered his cold toes, wishing he'd worn boots, but before long, his shoes and socks were inexplicably dry. Absorbed in his misery, he rubbed his nose and sneezed, barely registering the fact that his nose had finally stopped running. Nick looked around the train car. 3 passengers were with him. Across the aisle sat a tall, graying man, his face marked with deep lines and large pores. He sat with his legs sprawled out, absent-mindedly scratching his chest. 2 seats away, a younger man in a neat gray suit talked animatedly into a cell phone, his deep voice barely audible over the hum of the train. On Nick's right, separated by doors, sat a middle-aged woman with copper-colored hair, styled to appear sleek and thin. She carried a large canvas bag and stared quietly at the floor. The train jolted to a stop, and the doors hissed open. Nobody moved. Nick turned to gaze out the window at the dusky, rain-soaked evening. "I wish there were more interesting people on this train," Nick muttered under his breath. Some distraction from all the nonsense. The doors closed with a soft thud, and the train lurched back into motion. He hated these pointless rides home, surrounded by people he would never speak to. When he glanced back at the passengers, he was startled to see that the previous group had disappeared. The car now contained 3 people he found more visually engaging. The seat where the old man had sat was now occupied by a teenage girl with long blonde hair and flawless makeup that gave her skin a porcelain smoothness. Her figure was elegantly framed by a fitted sweater, and despite sitting in a relaxed, unrefined posture, she radiated a confident beauty. As Nick watched, she adjusted her position, crossing her legs with a more composed demeanor. She absent-mindedly brushed at the bottom of her shirt before returning her hands to her lap. 2 seats away sat a woman in a professional gray skirt and matching jacket. Her athletic legs were encased in dark, sheer stockings, which led down to small, delicate feet. She had short, bobbed brown hair and spoke loudly into her phone. Her voice easily carried over the sound of the moving train. "After a week like this, I just want to relax and have a good time, that's all," she said. Her eyes widened slightly, as if she realized what she had just shared with the rest of the passengers, and quickly cupped the phone with one hand, lowering her voice. Nick glanced to his right. The older woman had likely disembarked, replaced by a younger, slimmer woman in her early 20s, with long, straight copper hair that looked thick and lustrous. She turned her head and caught Nick's gaze before frowning. "What are you staring at?" she asked, then sighed heavily. Nick, flustered, answered, "Not you," and turned his attention back to the blonde. The train reached the next stop, and both the blonde and the redhead got off, leaving Nick alone with the woman still talking on her phone. He briefly wondered why they'd bought tickets for just one stop. As the redhead exited through the opposite doors, Nick caught a glimpse of her swaying hips. Her smart gray slacks were snug around her rear, but didn't do much for her legs. Shame she's got such an attitude, he thought. With a body like that, I wish she'd show it off more. As the train moved on, Nick's attention shifted back to the brunette on the phone. She had a fit, athletic figure and great legs, though Nick thought her chest was lacking. He quickly looked away, not wanting to be caught staring again, but couldn't help wishing she had a fuller bust. He smiled, realizing the girls had done exactly what he'd hoped, taken his mind off his problems for a while. When he looked back at the brunette, he was surprised to realize that, actually, her chest was more than ample, perfectly filling out her sharp business jacket and contrasting nicely with her slim frame. She caught his gaze, interrupting her conversation mid-sentence and giving him a look. Nick braced himself for a snub but was shocked when her frown transformed into a smile. "Hey, Jenny," she said into the phone. "I have to go. I think I found just what I need to unwind after this tough week." She pulled the phone from her ear and, with a playful look, asked, "What's your name, handsome?" Nick sat quietly in his Monday morning class, waiting for the lecture to begin. He hadn't done the reading, his weekend had been too busy. He thought back to meeting Katie on the train, admiring her stunning figure and never imagining he'd end up spending 3 nights and 2 days with her. He had been surprised that morning when he woke up to find she'd left without a word, no note, and no phone number. Easy come, easy go, he mused. Yet he found himself wishing that if she was just going to walk away like that, something would happen to make her think of him now and then, as he would certainly think of her. "I wish I'd knocked her one of those times we were together," he thought. It would have seemed fitting, somehow. He watched the classroom fill up slowly. It was late in the semester, and everyone seemed burnt out. He wondered what had possessed the registrar to schedule wills and estates for Monday mornings at 10. In the front row sat Lily, William, and Sophia. Lily and Sophia were stunning, but their attitudes were unbearable. William was just as obnoxious, a privileged, wealthy guy who, along with the girls, often took conservative, religious stances in class that Nick found utterly distasteful. He remembered back to his first-year constitutional law class, when the 3 of them were the only students eager to argue that Lawrence versus Texas had been wrongly decided. William had spoken loudly, stating, "Scalia's right, the whole court just blindly supports the homosexual agenda." "Not just the court," Lily added, "our entire government is being taken over by the homosexual lobby." Sophia then chimed in with an even more absurd statement, "I might even add that while Lawrence just prevents states from criminalizing gay sex, the way things are going, soon they might ban traditional families altogether." The professor quickly silenced them, pointing out that Sophia's claim had no basis in reality and was unsupported by logic. Yet, their stance was clear. Nick thought it was unfortunate that these 3 would eventually hold positions of power, able to spread their narrow-minded views. He wished, rather dramatically, that Lily and Sophia would fall deeply in love with each other, not just love, but lust too, and that William would suddenly become undeniably gay. As he watched William and Sophia shift seats, Nick was taken aback when he saw Lily and Sophia now sitting together, holding hands and smiling at each other. His attention was soon diverted by the arrival of Professor Adams, and the chatter quickly ceased. Nick opened his Word document to take notes, flipping through his textbook to the assigned reading. Professor Adams took his place at the lectern and cleared his throat, then addressed the class. "Before we begin, I think Lily has something she'd like to announce." Lily stood, her smile wide as she spoke. "Hey, everyone," she said cheerfully. "I just want to remind you that we're having the final meeting of the Gay Lesbian Transgender Alliance this afternoon at 2. I think you all should come." Nick nearly choked. He had expected the room to react with shock. After all, Lily's bigotry was well known, she was vocal about it. Yet, surprisingly, nobody seemed fazed by her announcement. Half the class wasn't even paying attention, their noses buried in books or scrolling through emails. Lily continued, "Today, William will share his story about being completely disowned by his family when he came out. Believe it or not, that still happens, even in 2011. Nick's mind raced. The girls on the train, the weekend with Katie, now Lily and William. He considered himself a rational man and struggled to believe that reality could be so easily manipulated. He looked down at his hand. He was still wearing the faded, battered ring he had found Friday evening. How had he not noticed it was still on his finger? And why hadn't he noticed putting it on in the first place? Nick was used to wishing for changes, both big and small, but he wasn't sure he was ready to believe he could make those wishes come true. He thought back to the train and the three girls. Had they really boarded, or had they simply replaced the men who had been there before? What happened to the men? Clearly, he thought, I'm losing my mind. Too much stress, too much worry. He sighed loudly and leaned back in his chair, trying to calm himself by convincing himself that what he had seen was a trick of the mind or a simple misperception. He snapped back to reality when he heard Professor Adams call his name. Mr. Donaldson, the professor asked, are you paying attention? Could you repeat the question? Nick responded. Sure, said the professor. How does the law treat an estate when both husband and wife die at the same time? I wish I could answer that, Nick said, and then, as if a switch had been flipped, he added, actually, I can. It depends on several pieces of additional information. Do they have a will? Do they have children? Is this an estate with the Uniform Simultaneous Death Act? Professor Adams provided the additional details, and Nick proceeded to answer the question along with a series of follow-ups. Before Nick knew it, class had ended, and he was sitting in the back of the nearly empty room, stunned. He stared at his notes, perfectly typed and filled with points he hadn't written or fully understood. He glanced at his textbook, which had the assigned reading marked up with highlights and notes in the margins. To his astonishment, he had a detailed understanding of every paragraph. This makes no sense, he thought. What is happening? Nick sat quietly at a small table in the far corner of the student lounge. The room was bright and warm, a stark contrast to the harsh winter rain and the grayness outside the windows. Nick absent-mindedly stared at the ring on his finger, pondering the increasingly strange sequence of events that seemed to have started when he found it. He wasn't sure if he was just imagining things, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was happening. Was he losing his mind? I could test it, he thought. But how? Was it right to change things, to change people like he had? He knew he couldn't undo it, he'd already tried. When he first entered the lounge, he'd seen Lily and Sophia sitting together, holding hands. Sophia leaned in, whispered something to Lily, and made her giggle. They both shared a smile, clearly enjoying the moment. I wish they were back to normal, Nick had thought, but nothing happened. A moment later, Sophia stood, kissed Lily quickly, and walked off toward the bathrooms. Nick wondered if maybe he had to say the wish aloud. He whispered, I wish they were back to normal, and then made his way to the corner of the room where he now sat. He watched Sophia as she emerged from the bathroom and returned to Lily. The pair kissed again as Sophia rejoined her. Nick wondered if his memory was faulty, maybe these two ultra-traditional, deeply religious girls had never existed at all. Maybe he had imagined them, his mind constructing a version of them from fragments of delusion. He didn't like where that thought was going. His gaze shifted across the room, settling on Riley White. Riley, a trans woman, had always earned Nick's respect for her courage. She stood at 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a voice that could never quite mimic a woman's tone. Her life, Nick thought, must be a constant struggle between who she was and who she wanted to be. No science or technology could fully reconcile her appearance with the person she must want to become. And then it hit him, I have a test subject. Without thinking, he wished, I wish Riley was really a woman. As soon as he thought it, the change was immediate. Riley disappeared, replaced by a petite young woman with delicate features, looking completely ordinary, cute but not stunning. She wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, her earlier frilly pink outfit gone. The transformation was shocking, as Riley's former self seemed to vanish, leaving behind someone who seemed untouched by any past struggles. Nick stared at the new woman, stunned by what had just occurred. He realized at that moment that he must have lost his mind. There was no way he could have this kind of power. He chuckled to himself, shaking his head. Well, this is either a ridiculous dream or I have no idea what's going on. Excuse me, a voice came from his left. Are you talking to me? Nick turned and saw a tall, well-built man in a tight t-shirt and jeans. He recognized the man from some of his classes, though he didn't know his name. No, Nick replied quickly, I'm sorry, I was just talking to myself. Okay, well, knock it off, man. It's a little unsettling sitting here while you mutter and laugh like you've lost it. Nick scowled at the man's comment. He studied him for a moment, trying to piece together what he knew about him. The man was a third-year student, possibly set to join the Marine Corps JAG after graduation. Nick thought for a moment and then, without meaning to, he muttered, I wish you were actually an international student from Syria, and a lesbian, but with a twist, I want you, and only you, to remember who you were before. Just like that, the change happened. Sitting next to Nick was a beautiful Arab woman, her long dark hair pulled back into a neat ponytail, wearing a modest hijab and conservative clothes. Despite her traditional attire, she had a light touch of makeup. She held her hands out in front of her face, staring at her delicate fingers. What happened to me? She whispered, her voice tinged with a subtle accent. Are you talking to me, miss? Nick asked, doing his best to act as if nothing was amiss. No, she replied, standing awkwardly and running her hands down her chest, looking completely disoriented. I'm just speaking to myself. No problem, Nick said, trying to play it cool. I think we all do that sometimes. He watched as the woman grabbed her things and hurried out of the building. Nick sat back, his mind racing. I must be dreaming, he thought. This can't be real. But if it was a dream, he decided, he might as well test its limits, enjoy the illusion until he woke up in his bedroom or found himself in a psychiatric ward. His eyes darted around the room. He first settled on a group of 3 young women sitting near the center of the lounge. He knew them from around campus as very active in the animal rights groups. They were vegetarians and had led the movement to have smoking banned from the campus. They dressed in the typical hipster style. I wish those 3 were deep into punk, loved meat, and smoked a pack a day, he declared. He smiled as their clothing changed, instantly, from the frumpy sweaters and skirts they had been wearing into tight jeans and leather jackets. He saw them stand up and smiled broadly as he watched. One of them fished through her purse and pull out a lighter and a pack of cigarettes. The girl gestured to her friends and the 3 made their way to the exit. His next target was a group of 6 men. They were athletic and frequently rode bicycles to school instead of driving. Nick had always been a little uncomfortable watching them ride in their tight fitting cycling gear and decided to pretty them up. I wish those 6 were highly athletic, large-chested, cycling, straight girls. But I want them, and only them, to remember what they were before. The change was immediate. Where before 2 of them had worn scruffy beards, they now had smooth skin. One of them stood up quickly, her generous chest bouncing erratically from the sudden motion. What the hell? She shrieked. 2 of the other new girls were staring at their friend's chest, not noticing their own. The other 3 had twisted and shocked looks plastered across their face as their hands traced their new contours. Their activity was drawing a lot of stares, leading to Nick to wish for them to calm down. Nick was looking forward to watching them ride up the hill to the school in the future. Too bad it's just a dream, he thought to himself. They're all so lovely. Nick was curious how complete the changes were. He stared at one of the 6 cyclists. She had been a tall man with a bald head and a bushy black beard that contrasted nicely against a deeply tanned and lined face. She now had pale, clear skin and long, black hair that fell several inches below her shoulders. Her small hands tightly cupped her chest as she sat, shocked and unmoving at the table. Nick now desperately wanted to find out how far this dream could go. "I wish she would go into the men's bathroom and check herself out," he whispered, alone. "I wish nobody else but her and me would go into the men's bathroom this afternoon," he added. "And I wish she wouldn't notice me unless I want her to." Nick watched as the young woman stood up and walked toward the bathrooms. Nick stood and followed. When he walked into the bathroom, she was making faces at herself in the mirror. Her long black hair would fall over her face and she would brush it back behind her ears. She blinked at herself, then mouthed a few words at herself, then gently began to run her hands along her frame. After several minutes she removed her shirt, gasping at the sight of her cleavage between her large, milk-white chest. She struggled to take off her bra, but not as much as Nick expected. She clearly had experience removing women's clothing from her prior incarnation. As her chest emerged from the bra, they bounced gently, revealing large, brown areola with well-formed stiff nipples. She began to bounce, slightly, watching her chest move with gravity, gasping and groping the sides of her chest to stop the jiggling. "This is so weird," she said to herself. "This feels so weird." Slowly, nervously, she reached for the buttons on her jeans and carefully wriggled out of them, dropping them to her ankles and then almost thoughtlessly stepping out of them. She was wearing yellow underwear which tightly cupped her crotch. She pulled carefully at the elastic, looking in, and then immediately let go of the band and let the elastic pull it back tight against her skin. She shook her head and whispered again, "Jesus, this can't be real. Do I really have a female organ? Am I losing my mind?" Nick began feeling uncomfortable. He wondered if it reflected poorly that he used his dream to take advantage of defenseless, almost mind-controlled women. He started to feel unreasonably voyeuristic. He sighed and made his way out of the bathroom, leaving the new girl to explore her new curves in peace. Nick sat at the back of the lecture hall, waiting for his afternoon class to begin. He scanned the room, noting that the class composition had shifted drastically since last week. Then, it had been a 50-50 split between men and women. Today, at least 3/4 of the class were female, all of them strikingly beautiful. Some were unaware of the change, while others seemed uncomfortable, occasionally pinching or poking themselves as if they doubted the reality of the bodies they now inhabited. Nick expected this bizarre dream to end soon and had decided not to alter anything further. The professor entered a little late. She was tall and slender, with well-shaped chest and long, mahogany hair. She appeared to be no older than 30, almost the same age as her students. Last week, she had been a short, aging man with bad teeth and a crooked back. Nick couldn't help but wonder if she was somewhat pleased with her second shot at youth, despite the gender change that came with it. This made Nick wonder what it felt like to completely change, to be someone entirely different without a moment of transition. He couldn't help but wish he knew what went through the minds of the men who suddenly found themselves as beautiful women. He coughed, feeling strange new sensations, and it took only a moment to realize what had happened. "For God's sake," Nick muttered, completely unprepared for the sound of his voice. He quickly stood up, feeling the weight of his body shift in unexpected ways. He noticed several girls in the room noticing him, their gazes filled with a knowing, sympathetic look. Panicked, he rushed out of the room, feeling his chest jiggle and his hips sway. He made his way to the bathroom and stared at himself in the mirror. Looking back at him was a woman who could be his sister, or at least, his sister if she'd had cosmetic surgery, chest enhancements, and a personal trainer. His eyes were the same, but his light brown hair now fell to his shoulders. His lips were fuller, his cheeks glowed with a healthy flush. He breathed deeply, watching as the woman's chest rose and fell, feeling an uncomfortable connection to the sensation, but also strangely detached from it. "Christ," he whispered, surprised by his voice again. "I really wish I didn't feel so weird." She paused, rolling her bright blue eyes and following their movement in the mirror. "That was stupid," she muttered, then sighed and studied her face. "I am her, she is me." Nick sighed, surprisingly unbothered by the way female pronouns naturally flowed from his lips. This whole surreal episode was starting to frustrate her. "I wish I knew when I was going to wake up from this dream," she demanded, her gaze shifting to the ring perched above her delicate knuckle. But as soon as she spoke, she realized it wasn't a dream. This was real. Every transformation, whether malicious or accidental, was permanent. Feeling panic rise, she tried to remove the ring. It was stuck tightly on her dainty finger. "I wish I could get this damn ring off," she shouted, before realizing her mistake. The ring disappeared. She searched around her feet, checked her pockets, backpack, and the counter, but the ring was nowhere to be found. With no solution in sight, she sat down on the bathroom floor, tears beginning to well up as she realized she had no idea how to undo what she had done. Meanwhile, Bill found the ring buried under a pile of charred wood and empty beer bottles on the beach. He was scavenging for items to recycle, hoping to find enough to buy a frozen burrito and a bottle of beer at 7-Eleven. His head was pounding from nicotine withdrawal and a hangover, so he barely noticed as he slipped the ring onto his index finger before returning to his search for cans and bottles.